and for Johnny, you know, his family has been completely wrecked by all of this stuff, and it's not fair. It's not right what she did and what happened for so many people to get affected from this. It's insane.
And Mr. Baruch?
How this happened.
Amber and Mr. Depp, did Amber ever report to you any physical violence on behalf of Mr. Depp toward Amber?
Yes.
What type of physical violence did she report to you? Do you recall seeing photos from Amber Heard?
I have, but I don't remember when I saw them.
What do you recall about the photos?
Her face was bruised.
Do you recall where on her face you saw, on Amber's face you saw bruises?
I think they were around her eyes, but I couldn't be positive.
Did you witness abuse by either?
I didn't witness.
Had you worked with Mr. Depp before working with Amber and Mr. Depp?
No.
Is it your testimony that while Mr. Depp may have said he wasn't violent with any of his other partners, there was violence from Mr. Depp toward Amber, correct?
Yes, you're right. He had been well controlled, I think, for almost, 20, 30 years. And both were victims of abuse in their homes. But I thought he had been well controlled for decades. And then with Ms. Heard, he was triggered, and they engaged in what I saw as mutual abuse.
Did you see any swelling of any kind on her face, either during the first time you saw her or the second time you saw her that night?
No.
Did you see any marks on her face, either the first time you observed her that night or the second time you observed her?
Just the redness, which was consistent with her crying.
Did you see any time that night any indication of any bruising on her face?
No.
Did you see at any time that evening any indication or any sign whatsoever of any injury to her face?
No.
During your investigation, you had other reasons to believe what was true.
That it was a verbal dispute.
And what did you have during your investigation that created in your mind evidence that it was only a verbal dispute?
After discussing the investigation with my partner at the scene, the Ms. Heard refused any medical treatment and had no visible injuries. There was no sign of struggle, and the the witness that was there that I spoke with was uncooperative as well.
Anything else?
At this time, that's all.
There were also moments of yelling and anger from both of them. And at some point I witnessed Ms. Heard throw a Red Bull can. She was agitated. Mr. Depp was agitated. I felt it was time to get Mr. Depp out of the situation, so I stepped in between Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp, telling Mr. Depp that we were leaving and that it wasn't up to him anymore. At that point, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a fist and an arm come across my right shoulder, and I heard and saw a closed fist contact Mr. Depp in the left side of his face.
And whose fist was that?
That was Miss Heard's fist.
So you're not looking at whether the article published in the UK in June 2018 calling Mr. Depp a wife beater caused him the damages, correct?
Correct.
You're not looking at whether the lawsuit that he brought in the UK against the publisher of that article caused him those damages, right?
Correct.
You're not looking at any of the evidence that came out in that lawsuit about alleged instances of abuse against Amber, correct?
Correct.
You're not looking at whether the consequences of Mr. Depp's drug and alcohol use have caused him the damages you're discussing, correct?
Correct.
You're not looking at whether the worsening performance at the box office of Mr. Depp's movies over time has caused him the damages that you're testifying about, correct?
Correct. And I'm not acknowledging any of this being accurate. I'm just saying that that wasn't part of my calculations.
Sure, I understand. I just want to make clear what you didn't look at, what you're not opining on. And so to round that out, you're not considering even the impact of Amber obtaining a restraining order in May 2016 and whether that may have caused him damages. That's not part of your opinion, correct?
Well, since we were taking a look at lost bookings using 2017 as a base year, any activity that preceded that would have been baked into those calculations that way.
Form any opinions with respect to Ms. Heard?
I did.
What were those opinions?
The results of Ms. Heard's evaluation supported 2 diagnoses, borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. So emotional reactivity is very common in the diagnosis. So essentially, like I said, there's instability in emotions. People with borderline personality disorder are often misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder because they can be up and down. They can look very depressed, then they can look very elated, but these changes are happening within a matter of hours. Somebody with bipolar disorder, this is a clinical depression lasting days, weeks, a clinical mania where sometimes they even need to be hospitalized because they're so grandiose. They clear out their bank account and go to Vegas and spend it all. They're acting in some very bizarre ways. With borderline personality disorder, you're having these fluctuating moods constantly. And again, this hypersensitivity to being slighted or feeling offended, really driven by the fear that if you're offended or slighted, if the therapist comes in 2 minutes late, or if somebody shows up to dinner 2 minutes late, that they might be abandoning you. And it's not as if the borderline is considering themselves abandoned in that moment, but they just know that they have this overwhelming emotion and there are no attempts to control that emotion. There are no attempts to regulate it. So if they're in the middle of the restaurant and they feel offended, they're going to start the fight. People are going to see it, or they might just start crying or break down, but they'll make a lot of accusations. And that reactivity is when you're going to see a lot of this escalation in the bizarre behavior. They can react violently. They can react aggressively. They will often physically prevent their partner from trying to leave if their partner wants to get space from all of this intense emotion. And oftentimes they will be abusive to their partners in these situations. They might say that they are going to file a restraining order or claim abuse, or they might do these things to essentially try to keep their partner from leaving. In the moment, again, they're not consciously thinking, I'm going to keep my partner from leaving right now. They're just thinking, I can't stand this. I hate my partner. They went from idealizing to suddenly devaluing because of the hurt. And they'll do anything to express that big emotion of anger. Ms. Heard did not have PTSD, and there were also pretty significant indications that she was grossly exaggerating symptoms of PTSD when asked about them.
How did you make that latter conclusion?
So one of the strengths of this test, as I mentioned, the important thing about any test used when you're doing an evaluation in forensics is to make sure that the person is responding accurately. And this test does that by not just asking people whether they have a symptom, but asking follow-up questions that draw out very detailed accounts of every single symptom of PTSD. And when you're really familiar with this disorder, which you need to be to administer this test, there are nuances in the way a person will describe their symptoms that have been shown repeatedly to indicate exaggeration or faking. There are also indications when somebody is clearly giving you a genuine response.
Did you arrive at any expert opinions?
Yes, I did.
All right, I would like to start with your main expert opinions and then go through those. Can you please tell the jury what your main opinions were?
So like I said, there are opinions embedded within them, but the main opinion is that Ms. Heard's report of intimate partner violence and the records that I reviewed is consistent with what we know in the field about intimate partner violence, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors.
And what was the other main opinion that you had?
The second main opinion was that that Ms. Heard demonstrated very clear psychological and traumatic effects or the exacerbation of trauma from those statements that Mr. Depp made through his attorney. There were 3 statements that we evaluated to see how they affected her emotionally and psychologically, and it was my determination that they did.
And did you arrive at any diagnostic conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And what were those?
I diagnosed Ms. Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Dr. Curry testified that one test showed, quote, intentional exaggeration in the 98th percentile, meaning that she engaged in extreme levels of exaggeration, end of quote. Do you agree with that?
I do not.
Why?
Because that test, the scale that she is referring to it's called ATR, it's the atypical response scale. As I said, that combines rare symptoms and over-endorsed symptoms. It's very frequently elevated in people who have high levels of distress. And then importantly, on this test specifically, it says, do not use the percentile rank. It is in the manual, it is in italices, because the way that this test was normed, it was normed on people who have trauma. So it's what we call negatively skewed. That means it falls on the tail end of the continuum. It is not a normal curve where we would normally think of how a percentile would work. So you would not use the percentile rank on this test.